Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Joy Smith, and you're streaming The Autonomy of Blackness. Welcome, new listeners. Welcome, returning. I'm so excited to finally be talking to an audience again. It's been a minute, and I've taken some time away from school to focus on more of myself and more on what I need to accomplish in my lifetime. I feel like a lot of the time we are so caught up in the day-to-day activities, we forget that there's so much other things to appreciate and to consider and to care for. And one of those for me is honestly my needs to help others. I feel like I've been so positioned in a place to try and rush to get this medical degree that I forgot the main reason as to why I want to get it, and that's to help the needs of others. And so I'm going to be taking some time away from school to focus on missionary work, and I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited to understand more about different cultures and to cultivate a better understanding of the world. So I'm returning with a new title. Instead of The Psychology of a Teenage Black Girl, I'm starting with The Autonomy of Blackness, which further resonates to the content that I'm going to be giving out. But I want to expound some more on what autonomy really means. I know that we're young and we're still figuring out our own autonomy. If you're with me in my age group, I am 20. So 20s is the years in which you really try to figure out more about yourself, not what you were taught, but more about who you are. And autonomy all comes down to really meaning individuality, a sense of self. But your autonomy doesn't exist in a vessel or a small compartment in which can be dictated by an individual else other than yourself. It's shaped by you, and it's shaped by your biology. It's shaped by your history, as well as your nervous system's response to racialization. And because outside of the fact that I'm a 20-year-old woman, I'm also a Black 20-year-old woman, and my Blackness is perceived first before I'm perceived as a woman. So our paths to autonomy is far different. And on this show, we're going to decode that path, as well as mapping what our ancestors knew about the psyche, as well as neuroscience and what it proves today with modern technology. I'm also going to integrate epigenetics, Jungian's depth of psychology, just to showcase one single language. And it's not going to be informed with mysticism. I'm showing you what was never actually mysticism, and it was just science. Science that couldn't been named, but is now translated. So I'm so excited to take you guys onto this journey of truth and hopefully replenishing our future to come. We're going to go back into the past to 1817 in Paris, where a woman is brought into Europe on display. Her name is Sarah Bartman. She's from the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And what happens next is that her body, specifically her private area, becomes the most publicly studied part of her personhood. And for 5 years, she's displayed in London, Dublin, and Paris, where she dances on a stage for crowds who would just stare at her. Scientists requested permission to examine her without consent. Doctors would take measurements. And the Musée de l'Homme, a popular museum in Paris, creates plasters and cast of her body to preserve the evidence. And what Europeans are looking at, what they believe they're proving through Sarah Bartman and her body, is that African women are fundamentally and biologically different, more sexual or more primitive, more animalistic. And here's what actually is happening. They're taking what the law permitted and the church blessed, and they're converting it into academic legitimacy. It just seems as basically they use Sarah Bartman's body as proof in medical documentation to make a weapon against our entire culture as Black women. After Sarah Bartman passes away, which was likely from complications of sexual transmitted diseases that was most likely contracted through coercion and exploitation. And they don't give her body back to her family. They keep it. They dissect it and they preserve her skeleton as well as her brain and place it in jars within the museum in Paris. This wasn't deviation from science. This was science at that time. So a legal framework of this is around that time, under chattel slavery, Black women were classified as property, not as human beings. They were objectively objects. They had diminished rights because they were not considered people. So this changes everything about how the law thinks about the violation itself. And if you are property, the law doesn't need to protect your body. It only needs to protect your owner's property's rights over it. So when an enslaver raped an enslaved woman, she couldn't testify because she couldn't be considered being raped. Legally, rape required a person, and she was not considered a person. She was an asset. And there's an actual court case from 1859. It's called State v. Mann, where a white man rents an enslaved girl and he shoots her. The judge rules that the man wasn't guilty of assault because the girl was enslaved, and the law gives enslavers total authority over the bodies of the enslaved. The judge literally writes on the document that the power of the master must be absolute. So this legal architecture, property has no violation. Property has no consent. Property has no childhood. So you can kind of see where I'm getting at with this. A common theme based on a flawed basis. During the antebellum period, around 1800s, black girls were put to work in fields as soon as they could walk. Around 7 or 8, they were considered full laborers, and by puberty, they were available for sexual exploitation. And there are court records, actual legal documents still allowed to be seen and viewed online from the 1800s where white men who were acquitted of raping enslaved girls as young as 10 years old. And the defense was that the black girls matured earlier and were naturally promiscuous. This wasn't a whispered belief. This was stated in court as a legal doctrine. The framework that produced that is not gone. It just has evolved and transformed into something else in our culture and in today's society. In today's knowledge, we can use a study from 2017 where Georgetown Law conducted something called Girlhood Interrupted, the erasure of black girls' childhood, where they surveyed adults across the country, teachers, counselors, as well as the general public, and asked them to assess children in photographs. When the children were white girls, adults saw childhood, as well as protection, innocence, and vulnerability. But when they saw the black girls, the same age as well as clothed the same and in the same context, adults saw adulthood, independence, knowledge, maturity, as well as responsibility, as young as the age of 5 years old. Black girls ages 5 to 14 were consistently rated as needing less protection, less nurturing, less support than white girls the same age. They were perceived as more knowledgeable about adult topics, including sex. And this misguided narrative of the youth in our community was derived from a lineage, because biases do not just appear out of nowhere. It comes and stems from something. Then the church started rationalizing the abuse by saying that African women were in a state of natural licentious, which means sexually uninhibited because of spiritual uncorrection. And this framing was deliberate. They wanted to distinguish the sexuality between a European woman and a black woman. They deemed European women to be needing protection of their sexuality, and black women needed management. It's taught that the sexual use of enslaved women wasn't a sin because it occurred outside of Christian marriage, which enslaved people were not legally allowed to marry. It was forbidden from entering. So the law made marriage impossible for these people, impossible for us to evolve. And the church used this as theological justification. And around the 19th century, European medicine took what the law permitted and the church blessed and gave it credibility. The Jezebel archetype wasn't cultural storytelling. It was medicalized. A well-known scientist, Cuvier, examined Sarah Bartman's body and documented it, the prominent buttocks of the African-American woman, and named it as evidence for hypersexuality being a biological trait, not behavior, and definitely not conditioning, something that was engraved into our bloodstream, our bodies, a biological fact. And other doctors built on this type of idea and narrative. They published papers, they displayed casts of her body in museums labeled as scientific evidence. And since this misguided narrative further pushed the Jezebel archetype, it got laundered through science, which kind of gave it more credibility. And that matters because when someone believes something, it's usually factually based through science. And a lot of people believe something that is just off of a misguided judgment, as well as numerous other factors like systematic issues, racialization that has built onto the archetype in the narrative of Black women being the Jezebel archetype in this type of society. But just in general, a lot of this is based off bigotry. That never stopped anything because we keep coming back. And in the 1990s, Atlanta Morehouse College, they began to start something there that would become one of the last moments Black people created a space for sexual exploration that wasn't being recorded, monetized, or performed for anyone's validation,
but for your own autonomy. And it was called Freaknik. Freaknik started as a spring break celebration at Atlanta's HBCUs. Young Black people would come to the city, thousands of them, filling the streets with Black bodies, Black sexuality, Black joy, Black freedom. And here's what's important. Nobody was filming. There was no fizz. There was no Instagram chats. There was no Snapchats. There was no social media to broadcast any of it. So there was no influencers documenting the experience for clout. There was no algorithm deciding who would see it or how it would be framed or how it might be talked about later on in a chat with some people you don't know. But it was just authentic. And people drove from across the country to be in a space where Black sexuality didn't need to be defended, didn't need to be explained or performed. It just existed in your body without someone monetizing your presence or someone talking about your presence. So for a moment, the framework broke. This was ours, not for white consumption, not for the male gaze, not for profit. It was just something for us. Our own autonomy, which is completely different than what we were used to at that time. So Freaknik wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just made for funsies for real. It was actually deeper rooted. It was only possible because of a very specific material condition. So historically, Black universities created spaces where Black people, particularly Black women, could gather without constant surveillance by white institutions. So you had your own autonomy over the space. And the rules were set by the community, not imposed from outside. And that's different from gathering in a white-owned club or surveilled downtown area. The HBCU was yours. Second, it was temporary and bounded. Because it was the first HBCU institutions, Freaknik happened once a year in spring break time. It had a beginning and an end, and that's important because it meant it wasn't a constant performance. You could be sexual and free for a weekend and be lit and turning hot and outside, you feel me? But step back into your regular life. You weren't building an entire identity around it. You weren't trying to monetize off of it. It was a moment and not a brand. Third, there was no profit motive. The institution wasn't trying to extract value from your sexuality. Brands weren't trying to sponsor Freaknik to reach Black consumers. That says a lot. And because there was no profit for this, it was honestly just authentic Black sexuality without being sold or without making some type of revenue from. So we were just being ourselves. We were just being free. We were just being how they would deem uncivilized, but to us, joyous, having a good time, having freedom. Another one, which is pure accountability, not algorithmic judgment. If you were at a Freaknik, you were surrounded by people like you, other people from your region, your school, your community, people that you knew, not just through social media and not through networking online. There was social accountability and social networking that assured further communication beyond means of media. So it was human accountability. It wasn't just cold judgment of millions of strangers or random people on TikTok. It wasn't an algorithm deciding whether your sexuality was appropriate enough to show to people, or people having to have concerns about it to begin with, because you would be anonymous to the broader world. That's a very specific condition that we do not have as well. You could be sexually free without that freedom following you everywhere or being talked about you. Like I mentioned earlier, fizz is a big deal within the HBCU communities, in which a lot of people talk about other people's experiences, which lack seclusion, privacy of any sort. So name was not attached to anything. Your face wasn't everywhere. There was no digital history or record at all. So they were wildin', and they should be, because there was a lot at that time that was definitely restricting normal hormones of young teenage people and young adults. This is natural. It is human. But due to lack of understanding Black autonomy in the ways that scientists should have, there's a lot of misguided and misunderstood stereotypes of the nature of a Black individual. Now, media and Black entertainment further pushes the agenda of what I'm trying to describe as sexual autonomy of Blackness. Because in the 1990s, a show called The Girlfriends premieres, and Jo Clayton, becomes something we hadn't really seen before on screen, a Black woman who was sexually autonomous, professionally ambitious, and respected for both. Not in spite of her sexuality, but not ignoring it, but by fully owning it as herself.
But here's what freedom and liberation really showed me throughout evolution of Freaknik and Girlfriend. The architecture didn't account for Black women that never stopped being authentic. Because despite the law, and despite what the church said, despite what science wanted to say and the algorithms, Black women still continue to create spaces of freedom outside, in the clubs, in the HBCUs, in cultural moments that said, we're going to take what was supposed to kill us and misrepresent us, and we're going to make it our own, and we're going to make it ours. And that was resistance. That was intentional. Now, those spaces didn't exist outside the system. They existed within and against it, because once Black women became reclaiming of their sexuality on their own terms and bases, the responses came fast. The church condemned it. The community began to police it again. But something shifted anyway, and that's what matters. Something in the mind shifted with Black women. Within the show of Girlfriends, Jo had multiple partners, and she was upfront about her desires. She was also a lawyer. She was intelligent. She was taken seriously by the show's narrative and the audience. This was radical because it broke the frame from the entire architecture. You're fast or you're pure. There was no in between. And so for a show to represent someone who was in between and a Black woman, it built tension of what she really represented for a lot of people who wanted to be a girlfriend. This tension needed to be named. It was not Jo showing us how to just be authentic, but it was Jo showing us what autonomy looked like as a Black woman. She was completely autonomous without constraints and free but aware of the cost. She had wisdom, and that is something that a lot of people who are Black women naturally just have. And I think that because we've been so used to conditioning of being told of something else and being something else, it's restrained a lot of people from exploring themselves to further understand who they are. This display of freedom was new to a community that has always been told to repress and systematically pushed to be more hypersexual. So she opened the gateway for perception of being sexually expressive without being labeled fast or being called a thought, and taking up physical space without being coded as threatening or hypersexual in the way the law and the church had described and taught people to see Black women. It was just the experience itself of having your own body in your own community and still being accepted without being shamed and framed to be something else by misjudgment. And that was rare. And that's what made the show different. That was what made Freaknik different. That's what opened the pathway to freedom for Black women. Though over time, things began to become more complicated and made things more harder for evolution of sexual autonomy. As social media became the new gathering place, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, those built foundations for different cultures. Because your face and your name and your sexuality is attached to your identity forever online. And you can't just be there for a weekend and then step back into your regular life. Your sexuality is now part of your permanent digital identity and how people perceive you without even getting to know you. So when we went from Freaknik, where Black women could explore sexuality in a bounded, non-commodified community, to TikTok, where every expression of sexuality is permanent, profitable, judged by strangers. The form looks like the same on the surface. Black women are still expressing sexuality. The spaces just don't appear to be ours. And though we had a space in the past with Freaknik, it was shut down and digital platforms filled the void, except they inverted every condition that made Freaknik free and autonomous. So now everything is permanent, everything is profitable, everything is attached to your name. And in the absence, in the loss of real conditions for freedom, something else happened, which was Black women starting to feel liberation and freedom through others and through celebrities, and resonating with others on social media who are expressive of their sexual freedom just in a new generation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stigmatization in our own community that push agendas about Megan Thee Stallion without really further knowing the space that she has opened for a lot of women in our community. She's sexually expressive, loud, unapologetic, and somehow against all odds, respected
in her field. She's Grammy-winning, commercially successful, treated like an artist and not a spectacle, treated like a human and not how Sarah Bartman was treated in the past. And that combination in today's society is very rare, and that's why it hits different. Because when Black women see her, they're not seeing a celebrity, they're seeing a version of themselves that got permission, a part of themselves that was allowed to be free. Now, on the other hand, there is an over tendency of social media to become parasocial with celebrities and lose between oneself and a celebrity, because a lot of people are living through herself in sexual exploitation, but a lot of people themselves don't have that type of freedom. Here's where Carl Jung's concept of projection becomes critical. You can't hate or worship something in someone else that doesn't live in you first. So when Black women obsess over Megan's freedom, they're not actually obsessing over her. They're just projecting the part of themselves they suppressed, the sexuality they had to manage due to society norms, and the freedom they never really had to have because they had to give it up. But a lot of the time, people actually try to live the freedom they couldn't have through someone else's body. And that's where this parasocial trap really begins. Now, a lot of this sexual suppression didn't come from white supremacy or patriarchy alone. It came from within the community. Like I said prior, a lot of stigmatization was coming from in the community for Megan Thee Stallion. And a lot of this is just deeply rooted within what happened in the past, conditioning us to repeat cycles. The church mothers saying, close your legs, the aunties policing what you wear, other Black women calling you a pick-me if you're too sexual, or a bitter feminist if you're not compliant enough. The Black men who sleep with you but won't claim you publicly. We internalized the harm. We became police for one another instead of the police actually having to police us. So when Megan refuses to be policed, when she exists sexually and publicly without shrinking herself, she becomes a mirror for all the ways you policed yourself. And defending her feels like defending the part of yourself you've been taught to kill. But that's also where the obsession deepens, because now it's not just about the celebrity. It's about reclaiming something that was stolen from you by people who looked like you. Now, due to stigmatization against Megan within our own community by majority Black men, a lot of Black women are defending Megan and making videos, pouring out their own trauma and rage about freedom and sexual freedom, and defending her, as well as just defending her as a human being. The algorithm is the only thing that is profiting off of Black women's pain. Every video is data, every comment is just more engagement, every emotional outpouring is currency. In the attention economy, pain performs. And Black women's pain, especially when it's tied to sexuality, to being too much, to navigating a world that fetishizes us and punishes us at the same time, that is just premium content. So in 1810, white people paid admission to see Sarah Bartman's body on display. And in 2026, platforms monetize Black women's emotional labor for advertisers' revenue. The extraction never stopped. It just moved from the physical body to the attention, the effect, the content we produce. We're processing our pain in public. And now we've got, one, Black women seeing Megan as their own suppressed freedom. That's real. That's valid. But two, the attachment crossing into obsession when you stop making choices based on your own life and start scripting them based on hers. The whole spiral generating profit for platforms that don't even care about your autonomy, your healing, or your freedom is the real root of the issue. And all of it points back to the same wounds. Black women never being able to sexually exist. It always had to be defended, suppressed, commodified, or turned into a symbol. That's the trap. So the real question is, what does freedom actually look like when you stop borrowing other celebrities like Megan Thee Stallion, and when you stop trying to live your autonomy through someone else? Well, we really need to start with what freedom actually looks like. Not Megan's, not a celebrity's, but what our own freedom looks like. With history and framework, we can see that Black women's bodies have never really truly belonged to themselves. For 400 years, it was coded as property, as sinful, as hypersexual, as a site of extraction, and as a symbol that you carried for other people's liberation or other people's condemnation. And even when you tried to reclaim it, even in spaces like mentioned prior, like Freaknik, or even through defending Megan on social digital platforms today, the extraction is just continuous just in a different form. So the question isn't how do I defend my sexuality or how do I perform my freedom? The question is how do I reclaim my body as actually mine? Now, autonomy isn't just political. It's not just psychological. It's spiritual. Your body is a temple, and not in the Christian sense of purity that we talked about previously, but in the sense of sacred space, a place that belongs to you, a place you inhabit, not a stage you perform on, not a commodity you trade, not a symbol you carry. When you reclaim your body as sacred and you stop asking what people will think of you, or does this confirm the stereotype, or am I being respected, or does this defend the community? Will I get engagement? All of those questions. And you start asking, what does my body actually want? What does pleasure mean to me when I'm not managing anyone else's perception of it? What does sexuality mean when it's not being extracted? These questions require you to get quiet and really think to yourself, and to move away from the noise of social media and the expectations of your family, the policing of communities, the gaze of everyone trained to see your body as public. And it's kind of hard. It's actually really hard because in that silence, you become visible in a different way. You become more transparent, and not to millions of strangers, but to your own self. So you start feeling what's actually true in your body and separate from what you've been told. That's interoceptive autonomy, the ability to sense what you actually want, not what you've been taught to want. Carl Jung called this process individuation. Becoming your actual self, not the self that's been constructed for you. For Black women, individuation means separating from the archetypal roles you've been assigned, the family's expectations about what a respectable woman looks like, the community's respectability politics, the algorithm's demand that you monetize and perform for your pain, the constant pressure to represent or defend. You know, individuation is the moment you realize I don't owe anyone a performance of my own autonomy. You don't have to be respectful to deserve protection. You don't have to be sexually conservative to deserve respect. You don't have to perform your pain publicly to be heard. And you definitely don't have to defend other Black women's sexuality to validate your own. You just get to be you. You get to be yourself. You just get to be. That's scary because the entire system was designed so you would never feel safe. You're always property in some sense. Always a symbol, always a representation. But the shift is once you reclaim your body as sacred, once you center your actual desires instead of the community's expectations or the algorithm's demand, you start making different choices. You start using more wisdom because you're trusting your own intuition and you're not choosing based on someone else, like a celebrity. You're not choosing based on confirming or denying the stereotype. You're based on what will get likes. You're choosing because the choices are aligned with your actual autonomy and what feels right to you. There's a difference between freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from the system, from the stereotype, from the policing, that's necessary. That's what Freaknik was. That's what the archetype of Jo from Girlfriends was. That's what we're trying to find when we defend Megan. But freedom, too, is to choose your own sexuality and autonomy, to define your own body, to exist without constantly reacting to what was being done to you or what's being asked of you. That requires a different type of work. It requires you to develop what I call agency in autonomy, the ability to make choices based on your actual life, your actual partner, your actual needs, not based on what's profitable, what's respectable, what's symbolic, or what's being extracted. From that place, from knowing that you actually want something of your own self, choosing that, from your body telling you what's true, you start moving differently. You're not reacting to the system attempt to steal your autonomy. You're building your own autonomy. And it's not for anybody but yourself. And so we traced it. The law that made your body property, the church that blessed it, the science that proved it, the spaces where you tried to reclaim it, and the commodification of the reclamation. And that's the exception. Defending Megan like defending the part of yourself you've been taught to kill. But here's what matters. No celebrity is your freedom. Freaknik is not our freedom. Your mother's voice, your auntie's warnings, the algorithm judgment, and what people in our own community, men sometimes have to say, is not their business, nor is it their freedom. It's our freedom, and it's your freedom, and your freedom lives in your own body, and what actually is true when nobody's watching. So trust your body because it knows your ways. It knows its way home. Thank you all for tuning in today's episode.
I'm so grateful to be able to share this content and educate people. And if this episode resonated, if it cracked something open, share it, send it to someone who needs to hear it. My DMs on Instagram are always open. The work of reclaiming autonomy doesn't happen in isolation. You can find me at TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook as the @AutonomyOfBlackness. Now, my website will be released very soon. It's going to have deeper work, as well as one-on-one sessions, courses, and community healing circles. And if you want to support that directly, all the links will also be included on that page. Most importantly, trust your body, keep asking what's actually true, and I'll be back soon with the next episode. Until then, stay autonomous.